Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Newsbeat podcast. My name's Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. We've got an action-packed show today, and I just can't believe that I'm sitting here talking to Mr. Doomberg. Doomberg is a phenomenal resource for the world in finance, energy, unbelievable. And I'm sorry for being so excited. Mr. Doomberg, thank you for stopping by.
Stu, it's long time in the making. It's about time, your show is all about energy. So, it's really looking forward to it. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I mean, your story today, after we get a little bit rolling here, critical leverage is a perfect example of what Doomberg's all about. Details, references, cross checks. You're a true reporter and everything else. So, we just chit-chatted before the show. You're a chicken, right?
Yes.
And for our podcast listeners, we're going to have his picture in the show notes. Substack author, and I am so excited just to visit with him about his picture. I'm talking to him, and he looks phenomenal. Okay. Tell us about how Doomberg got started and where you are right now.
You bet. Doomberg is a Substack, as you mentioned. We are anonymous, a very small team. We come predominantly from industry, from the commodity sector, which we think makes us pretty unique in the content creation space, especially in the area of energy and geopolitics and finance, and in the intersection of those three categories. As you know, most people who work in industry at the big companies have RSUs to protect and options to worry about and public affairs teams standing between them and the press. And they are basically forbidden from having any meaningful social media footprint. And what that has meant historically is that the energy debate has occurred between academicians and politicians. And there's the voice of industry and what's reasonable and what's practical and what's doable and what's sensible and what obeys the laws of physics has been, by and large, meaningfully absent from that debate. And this was the inefficiency in the market that we chose to occupy back in May of 2021, when we launched Doomberg, first as a free service and now as a paid. The green chicken, which you refer to as our brand, we had no social media footprint when we started this project. And so one of the rules of marketing is you can't be remembered if you don't stand out. And so in lieu of just another person who looks like an executive, we thought the green chicken might be a little stickier. And then once we gain some momentum, it's kind of, you don't want to de-anonymize because then that can collapse the brand intrigue. And so that's the genesis of Doomberg. I'm a scientist by training. And so I had spent a couple of decades in industry doing research and development in various energy technologies. And so with this molecular map of how the economy actually works, we can read a Reuters story about First Solar and within 5 minutes immediately spit out the outline that we published today, critical leverage. And so if you want to jump right into that, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, cool. Before we do that, I've got to ask some really personal questions. Okay. Do you work remote? I got a whole list of questions that fans for our show sent in. Do you work remote?
Yes, of course. Yeah. We have our own office. When you do what you love for a living, it's not really work. So it's kind of a trick question. We research, write, edit, publish, and promote fun pieces, and it's the work of my life in particular. This is what I was meant to do. And when you find what you were meant to be doing in life, Lord knows, just keep doing it is a sound strategy. And so we have purchased a chicken coop, a office that we can go to. I'm a big believer that you have to go somewhere. Like work means leaving the home in my mind. I know the work from home thing is kind of a big deal, but even when we were building a consulting firm or before Doomberg was a thing and it exploded, we always had a place to go. And so we work remotely in the sense that we don't work at some big company and we don't badge in and we don't have an HR department and we don't keep office hours. And if I want a glass of wine with lunch, I don't have to worry about getting busted when I badge back in. So and by that measure, life is fantastic.
Nice. Well, again, thank you for your time. Let's dive in on critical leverage. Your insight on everything. Love the first quote. It's okay to have your eggs in one basket as long as you control what happens to that basket, Elon Musk. And then we start jumping right on into China. Let's hear what you have an opinion on China on this.
There's one overarching theme of our work is how China, because we have experienced this firsthand, competing against Chinese state-owned enterprises in our careers. China has executed nearly flawlessly a strategic objective, an economic strategic objective of controlling critical choke points in virtually every supply chain that matters. And whether it be sensitive military technology or anything to do with the production or transmission of energy, China works to paper over their own weakness, i.e. lack of oil and gas deposits of meaningful size, in order to gain leverage in a variety of ways. And one of the ways they do that is to monopolize all of the dirty, hard parts of the early part of the supply chain that we in the West don't like to do. And one area where they have done this quite famously is in polysilicon solar. They control the production of polysilicon. They control the conversion of that polysilicon into ignits. Something like 98% of ignit capacity flows through China. So even though we have 3 factories in the US producing polysilicon today, which is the key ingredient that goes into the majority of solar cells, all of that polysilicon ends up going on a boat to China and gets transformed into ignits and then into wafers, sliced into wafers. And they also control the cutting fluids market and all manner of things. Then those wafers get, transformed into solar cells, which gets mounted into PV modules. And that's sort of the supply chain. And China owns 72% of polysilicon, 98% of ignits, 97% of wafers, 81% of cells, and 77% of modules. And even the cells and modules are a little deceptive because they have set up shop outside of China to try to circumvent U.S. Tariff policies in countries like Vietnam and Malaysia and Thailand. And so, so with that background, there's one major exception. And whenever we point this out, astute subscribers always ask us about First Solar. And I should say up front, we don't invest in anything. We have no position in First Solar, no member of the Doomberg team, long or short, options or calls, stock or bonds. We have no financial interest in First Solar, just so people know that. But we decided to do a deep dive on First Solar because of the following reason. They are held up as an American-made solar company that is not beholden to the polysilicon industry.
Right.
And the reason that this is at least at the surface plausible is because they don't do polysilicon chemistry. They use cadmium telluride technology to make reasonably efficient, pretty cheap cells. And we saw this article in Reuters because they just announced the opening of their next factory, the 5th one in the US. And Reuters described it as a surge in demand for American-made solar panels.
Right.
What does American-made mean in this context? And by the way, we are throwing billions of dollars at this industry. First Solar stands to gain a lot of it. As soon as I read American-made, and then this other quote that at the end of Reuters, solar project developers in the US have flocked to First Solar's cadmium telluride products because the technology does not rely on polysilicon, a raw material primarily made in China. This is meant to imply that First Solar does not depend on China, but of course they do. And I knew intuitively as soon as I read that quote. And to give away the story, of course, China controls tellurium production, which is one of the rarest elements on Earth. And First Solar confesses in its annual report that it is effectively single-sourced in that regard. And so everywhere we look, China controls a critical choke point, and First Solar is no different. And so we walked through how tellurium is made and where it comes from and how little of it there is and so on and so on. And yet here we are spending billions of dollars creating demand for a choke point that China controls.
Yeah. Now, when you sit back and sit on that choke point, your chart is phenomenal. Look at this. This is just your facts, charts, and proof in this story are phenomenal. But the marketing of them, they'll go out and say it's American made. That's a marketing department.
So we wrote a piece a while ago called No Assembly Required, where we talked about the difference between manufacturing and assembly. And it's subtle. but it's important.
Right.
And if you import cells from China and then mount them into modules and, put the balance of systems in there, is that manufacturing or is that assembly? It's assembly, actually.
Right.
And the manufacturing is, in fact, is the hard stuff, the transforming of raw materials into useful products that then go on to have, value added downstream. And we have outsourced our manufacturing. And then we use public funds to convince people that we are, let's say, removing our leverage, removing our dependency on China by, investing in manufacturing facilities. So, I mean, they look similar, right? Both have factories with cars in the parking lot, and inputs go into them, and different products come out of them. But there is a difference between manufacturing and assembling. And in that piece, No Assembly Required, which we published in December, we define manufacturing involves the transformation of raw materials into a part or a component, whereas assembly is the process of taking multiple parts and arranging them in a specific way. And First Solar buys CAD Telluride, and then they do some manufacturing. They were sort of at the interface between traditional manufacturing and assembly because they use complex chemical techniques like chemical vapor deposition to make very thin films of CAD Telluride, and then connect them into the final components. But they need to buy CAD Telluride, and China, actually, we didn't put it in the piece, but they also control cadmium production as well. But cadmium is a little more abundant and is not the sort of rate limiting step or the constraining step. And because the piece was already long enough, we decided to cut that part out.
Let me ask this about China's supply chain and Taiwan. You'd mentioned Taiwan in some of your articles and things. With the China economy, all the news from, the Wall Street Journal and everything was saying that they're worried about China's economy this morning having a big hit and stuff. And in a geopolitical way, was it wag the dog or something when things are bad? Is China going to, you think about them invading China to try to, pull the old squirrel, from their people and their problems to creating a war.
Yeah, invading Taiwan, I believe, is what you meant to say.
Yes.
We opened,
Thank you.
That's not the problem. Yeah, we opened Critical Leverage by telling the story of Kyle Bass giving this presentation at the Hudson Institute, which we described as a conservative think tank that never saw a war it didn't like. And I would say it is entirely possible that Kyle Bass is right. We only wrote this piece to highlight, in that presentation, Kyle Bass says, with a flick of a switch, we could turn off the Chinese economy and crush their economy. It's like, yes.
Right.
And what would the rebound effects be to us? and our point is, like, we have a symbiotic relationship with China where they have leveraged, their economic strategy to gain significant leverage on us, and they would collapse our economy very quickly in return. And so this was the key reason why we wrote this piece. Now, to your point, we are seeing a deluge of propaganda in the West around the relatively poor state of the Chinese economy. It might very well be that the Chinese economy is in a very poor state. And to your question, if it is, that would feed some increased likelihood that Kyle Bass is in fact correct, and that Xi Jinping will indeed invade Taiwan. If he does, I mean, shudder the thought, because it's going to be, let's put it this way, that is not priced into the markets today.
No. Now, on ESG, on the solar panels, we chunk so much of our solar panels that fall off, and they're so many years and then they have to be done. We load them on boats and throw them to other countries. Recycling is a huge deal. And on your other post, I can't remember if it was yesterday or day before, you were talking about warehouses and how the activists are going to start going after the warehousing. How is that going to affect the supply chain?
Yeah, so two questions are there, really.
Okay.
Recycling is a fascinating topic and one that we've given a lot of thought to. And in fact, another thing that we left out of this piece is once enough of these CAD Telluride cells panels get installed out in the wild, there will be an opportunity for a recycler given the value and the rarity of the metals involved. And there are some people who believe that once enough CAD Telluride cells get installed, that the the rate of old panels coming offline with efficient recycling could in fact make it kind of a closed loop. And so you wouldn't need all that much incremental tellurium to make that go. We wrote a piece separately on warehouse wars. It was called Warehouse Wars on the attack on the Humble warehouse in California and the Inland Empire. And we like to, so we're pretty good with patterns and pattern recognition, and we have a pretty good sense, having interacted with the environmental movement for the length of our careers, where they're going. And we like to get ahead of it and put it in the minds of our subscribers so that when they see it reported in the media a few months later, they say to themselves, Doomberg had that. And this is one of those pieces where we think we're kind of leading the news in this area. Now, it's, to be fair, the concept has been reported on, and we quoted them in the LA Times and a few other areas, but not quite in the way that we framed it. And last thing I would say, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to build on. You talked about our sort of journalism style. We are not professional journalists, but we aspire to be professional in our journalism. And so because we're not trained in like, one of the things that is kind of annoying is like when people call themselves engineers, but they're not actually engineers. And that sort of stolen valor. We are not journalists. We didn't go to journalism school. We would probably consider ourselves to be citizen journalists, but we try to be as professional as we can about it. We do show our homework, link to all of the sources, and give credit by doing so as well. So it's kind of a win-win.
Oh, I'll tell you, your weaving of stories into same topics is incredible. I try to do that on my daily show, and I try to pick all the stories for that daily show, and they weave into a theme. You guys do that phenomenally, and I'm sorry, I consider you guys, considering we have a media and a way, your stuff is fantastic because it while you consider it not, you're a scientist, correct?
Yes.
So you adhere to the scientific rules that they don't.
Yeah, I would say we are more than happy with the relative demise of the U.S. media in the narrow sense that it has provided us with the economic opportunity to create an amazing living. And so it is bad for democracy, it's bad for the country, but it is unabashedly bullish for Doomberg and other similar independent media-like outlets. And so another thing that differentiates us from, say, traditional journalists is we have opinions and we express them. And so we're not doing traditional reporting, but even when we express our opinions, we like to be open-minded about it and willing to change our minds. And one of the ways that we stoke conversation with our subscribers is by providing all of the links and all of the homework to the pieces. And we do rigorous fact-checking. I would say, we've done, I think, 220 pieces and counting. There's probably 4 or 5 facts that we got wrong. Most famously, recently, we accidentally called Doug Ford the former mayor of Toronto, when in fact he was a city councilman, and it was his brother, Tom Ford, who, may he rest in peace, was a bit more of a high-profile character than Doug. But so that's an example of a fact that we didn't pick up in our fact checking.
You admit it, Doomberg.
Oh, of course,
you admit it.
Yeah.
Other folks don't do that.
It's hard, just as an aside, with the volume that we put out, like probably 7 pieces a month, it's incredibly easy to say something incorrect that you actually know is incorrect when somebody points it out to you, but your brain just doesn't work that way while you're writing and editing. It might be something that you think you're going to go back and check. And we've worked hard. We have a pretty systematic work process around generating our pieces, which is how we are able to weave the stories in and focus on the titles and all that stuff. There's still, no matter how hard you try and how many times you read it, occasionally something slips through. Like, I know Doug Ford wasn't the mayor of Toronto. I don't know why I wrote it, and I don't know how it got through our editor, but it did, and it happens, but then you correct it immediately because we can edit our pieces. And the nice thing, and then one last point on Inside Baseball, when we have like 177,000 emails, and so every time we publish our piece, we're sending out an enormous amount of emails, and that we're in a constant battle with the spam filters. Our stuff shows up in people's junk folders. One of the things we thought about doing was occasionally making a typo on purpose, and here's why. It turns out when we make a typo, we get hundreds of email replies pointing out the typo all day long, right? And it turns out that if people reply to an email the algorithms don't assume it's not spam because nobody ever replies to spam. And
right.
so we could trick the algorithm into giving us an easier go of it if we just put a typo in every fourth or fifth piece. Because we get so many responses.
Is that? I love that.
We've decided not to do it out of pride, but this is a workaround to the Google Gmail spam filters that we have uncovered by accident.
But you know what? That's brilliant. And there's nothing wrong with getting the word out on some of these things until Google figures this out. My website, Mr. Doomberg, is we're getting not hacked. Well, yeah. Most of the hacks are coming from the United States, and we're getting millions of impressions on my podcast. We're approaching 100,000 downloads only, not listens and everything else.
Sure.
On this podcast for this year. And I love my guests. I love everything. And you can tell I'm excited about everything in this. And I am with you. I don't consider myself a journalist, but having the reach that you have only in Substack, you had just mentioned in even the interview with David Blackman, your Twitter, and you have no other social media. You own your own channel.
Yeah, we actually just left Twitter for a variety of reasons, which we described in a piece that we wrote called Notes on X. And so right now we are 100% all in on the Substack ecosystem.
Right.
And we've decided to engage our audience to grow by, audience-led growth. And
bonuses.
And
referral fee. Sure. I love that.
Well, and our thinking is twofold. This perfectly aligns our incentives. So if we delight our readers, here is an overt way for them to help us.
Right.
Whereas we were struggling on Twitter because famously the new owner of Twitter has throttled all Substack accounts and references. And we struggled with that for several months. And so instead of trying to trick an algorithm that's programmed against us, we said, why don't we just engage our audience? And even though we're paywalled, we do allow people to forward selectively. And we are aware of certain Wall Street institutions who have one subscription that's read by dozens of people internally. Like we could tell, and we've just decided that, we'll just try to keep honest people honest, and we're not going to go after the serial abusers. But we have more than enough subscribers to make a living doing what we love.
And people, don't know that it's there. It's like Substack. It does a great job with getting everything out there. And Substack folks, the whoever is doing all the Substack stuff is phenomenal. I just love the way they do it, and I hope they stay independent, because I'm getting slaughtered on Google. I can get shut down in the US, and I'm wide open in Europe since we're in 94 countries. So I can tell where I'm getting shut down, and it just is irritating. And I hope Substack stays that way.
Yeah, and again, in full disclosure, we did participate in Substack's author-led equity round, and so we are partial owners of Substack. And I like to disclose all of our potential conflicts. But we too we invested in Substack in part because of their stance on free speech. We'll see how long they're able to resist it.
Right.
But we figured, if they do get bought out by somebody, at least we can make some upside on it.
How is Notes doing? Because I'm just now getting started in it, and I really like the fact that Substack did it, so I can share, and I've not shared your stuff yet since I'm getting started in it. I've shared other Substack authors that are not paid. I love having your paid articles. But how's Notes doing? Do you know? I mean,
that's where we are exclusively today. That we left Twitter for Notes. It's early days, and it is not like Twitter. I mean, it's not as crowded as Twitter. It's different in a lot of ways, but it's new and it's growing. And we built our Twitter account from nothing, and so we're not afraid to start over and build something new somewhere else. It's kind of fun to build if we're being
your interaction with your subscribers is phenomenal. I think it was one of your articles where I think you even put in I'm old, and so I saw that one of your folks are putting in there Irina Slav, and they're even going back and quoting and stuff like that. And I've had Irina on my podcast several times. Love Irina. And you've got the interaction that you're having has got to be noticed in your algorithms.
Yeah, no, it's good. We've been treated well. We've grown so far beyond anything that we could have imagined.
Right.
I did an interview with the co-founder of Substack. He hasn't published it yet, but I said to him, if you'd have asked us before we started Doomberg to write down on a piece of paper what our wildest dreams would be,
right,
we've lapped that several times over. And it's really important in life to not then just go ahead and reset what your wildest dreams are. Like we have accomplished an amazing thing that we're totally proud of, that has changed our lives. It provides financial freedom to all of the families associated with the project. And that's great. And we should enjoy that. And we should savor that. What we shouldn't do is rewrite our wildest dreams and then be disappointed if we don't meet some new higher goal. And so this is one of the reasons why we left Twitter. Like, if we're purely about optimizing subscriber numbers and revenue, we would have plugged our nose and stuck it out. But some things are more important in life, including, waking up each day and being as happy as you can be. And frankly, Substack has been our partners, and Twitter has X now has become antagonistic towards Substack authors. And so we would much rather lose with our partners than win with an antagonist. And that's just, that's our motto. And that's what we're going to do.
That's incredibly smart. What's coming around the corner for Doomberg? What is coming around? Because I just want to know two things. How can I help you? How can other podcast folks help you? And then also, what's coming around the corner?
I mean, you just having us on your show is a great help, and your support is greatly appreciated. And of course, your listeners are more than welcome to subscribe. We are 100% subscriber supported. We do not accept ads or sponsorships, just so that we can keep the maximum degree of editorial freedom. And subscribers who are super fans can gift additional subscribers to their in-laws who may need an energy lesson or two. And so more than happy to provide that option as well, and just helping us get the word out. What's next for Doomberg? We don't really know what we're going to write about until we know what we're going to write about. So today's publication day, I'll just give you some insight. A lot of comments. So paying subscribers can comment to our pieces, and we make sure to interact with as many of those comments as possible. Emails, a lot of people don't want to comment publicly, so we get 100 or 2 inbound emails that we and it's literally one of 2 of us that is responding to every comment or email. So it's a key member of the team. And there's all kinds of little other issues. There's a promotion part of it, so doing a podcast like this, which is great. And then I'll typically see something in the news, which will trigger a story that I have filed away in my brain. And then once we settle on a title, the piece kind of writes itself. So I don't know what's next. Today and tomorrow would be days where I would peruse the internet in search of something to write about. And then oftentimes it happens pretty quickly once, for example, critical leverage. I read that Reuters story about the first solar announcement of choosing Louisiana for its 5th factory. And when I read that final line, the entire piece just appeared in my head, and we wrote it very quickly after that. So
how cool is that? Now, on some of the other things coming around the corner, are you keeping tabs on the climate crisis? And because it's impacting energy, and when you have China just kind of going, I can't do a Chinese accent imitation. My Putin imitation is pretty good. But when you sit back and kind of go with their China, the climate topics interact with energy so well. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, we've written about this several times, that the global south is going to ignore their climate goals. And they're going to consume, every molecule of fossil fuels produced in the world will be burned by somebody somewhere. And any local restrictions only shift who gets to enjoy that privilege. And this is because fundamentally energy is life, and everybody everywhere wants a higher standard of living, which means everybody everywhere would like to harness as much energy as possible. And this fundamental truism, the denial of that fundamental truism is so obviously a luxury of the rich.
Oh, yes.
that the poor in the world, which happens to be the majority,
Right.
aren't going to be so foolish. And so if we banned gasoline today, every molecule of gasoline refined would be burned in the developed world because it would temporarily be cheap enough for them to acquire it, and they would. And so we, of course, write about the climate crisis all the time. In the long run, it's probably going to be the thing that gets us canceled, but it will have been a fun ride. So we're not too worried about it.
But your email is your own personal channel. So
yes, but there's still choke points that they could attack people like us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't want to say them because I don't want to arm the our opponents.
Sorry for bringing that up. But hey, I really respect you and your opinions, because it is my opinion that we need to have the lowest cost kilowatt per hour delivered to every citizen in the world with the least impact on the world, and sustainable through not printing money. I believe the world has been printing way too much money, and we're headed to a depression. We're heading into some tough times, and I could be wrong, but on the other hand, I love your attitude toward that as well too. You're a lot like Alex Epstein in the humanitarian and your thoughts. So thank you very much for your industry thought leadership.
I appreciate that. And thanks a lot for having me on today. It was a real blast.
Again, thank you. I'd give you a hug, but I don't know how to hug a green chicken. And one last question. Thank you again so much. If you do live events, are you the guy that's going to have to be in a chicken suit?
Yeah, well, we would only do remote events with very, very rare exceptions for people that we know pre-existing. But actually, it should be said, we've done a few, paid speaking events where we zoom in as the green chicken. And I do think that this is a concept that we've not pushed or explored or promoted, but as the world becomes more remote, the times we've done it, it works just fine. We have a prepared presentation. They don't have to cover our travel, and the audience gets a chuckle. And then we present hopefully some insightful things, and we engage in active Q&A live with the audience, and then leave the meeting and go about the rest of our day. It works great.
I really wish you'd get a suit like, do you remember the Intel bunny men?
Yeah.
Okay. I did one on the stage, and I was dancing around and everything else in front of thousands of people. And Andy Grove sent out a note saying nobody but the actors are allowed to wear the bunny suits the day after I did my dance on stage. So whoever you pick, if you do a suit, has to be trained. Okay.
It'll just be me, I promise. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we can't wait to talk to you in the future and follow you and try to help you out.
Will do. Thanks, Stu. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.